Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again. If you saw my previous Austin Powers movie review, you will know that I was not terribly enthusiastic about it, but it's impossible to deny the massive cultural impact that that film had. Or at least in the late 90s and early 2000s anyway, the 60s spoof was very popular, so a sequel was inevitable, and sure enough, by 1999, The Spy Who Shagged Me was released, and once again featuring Mike Myers, as well as a lot of returning cast members and a significantly increased budget, up from $16.5 million to $33 million. As we covered in the last review, the first film is a little rough around the edges, and the lack of budget shows, as well as how much improv the cast were allowed to do, and this second installment certainly looks prettier and feels like it sticks more closely to a script, and I don't think it's unfair of me to say that this is the film that people think of when they think of Austin Powers, not the first film. Much like how Dr. No was missing several key elements of the James Bond formula, so was International Man of Mystery to the Austin Powers formula, if there is such a thing. But first, let's talk about the plot. Much like the first film, it doesn't matter that much, as the appeal of the film is seeing Myers and a bunch of comedy characters doing their shtick to camera, but the plot here is certainly more developed than in the previous film. So we pick up right where the last film left off, with Austin Powers and Vanessa Kensington, once again played by Liz Hurley, on their honeymoon when it turns out that Vanessa was a robot under the command of Dr. Evil all along and tries to kill Austin before self-destructing. Austin has a moment of mourning before realizing he no longer has to commit to just one woman, and therefore yippee.
That means I'm single again! Oh, behave! Yeah!
So, props to Liz Hurley for returning for such a thankless role. She was the co-star of the last film, and to come back just to be hastily dispatched of is somewhat disappointing, I thought. The robot thing makes no sense at all, but then this isn't a series where we're supposed to care about details like that, so whatever, they get rid of her, clearly, because they just want to do the James Bond thing and have Austin romancing a new lady in each adventure. So, Dr. Evil is back, and his villainous scheme this time involves going back in time to the 1960s and stealing Austin's mojo, which is the source of all his sexiness, as a means of neutralizing the hero. It's in the early stages of the film that we are introduced to one of the icons of the series, who surprisingly wasn't in the last film, but of course it's Mini-Me, played by Vern Troyer, who is a 1/8 sized clone of Dr. Evil. The character was inspired by a 1996 movie called The Island of Dr. Moreau, and it is a movie that no one sees anymore, and with good reason. In that film, Marlon Brando, for some reason, has a little person companion who, I don't know if he was supposed to be a clone or whatever, it's been so long since I've seen the film, but the two are seen together a lot and often in similar clothes, performing similar actions, and you know what, it's a terrible, terrible film, but the sight of Marlon Brando playing a grand piano, and then on top of that piano is another piano that the little person is playing, is just one of the most bizarrely brilliant images I've ever seen in a film. Like, honestly, it's a terrible, terrible film, but there are just some Marlon Brando scenes that are so just off-the-wall crazy. I kind of recommend it on that basis. Anyway, Austin travels back in time to thwart Dr. Evil, and so the bulk of the film takes place in 1969. There's a funny gag with Dr. Evil and his henchpeople here. It's Mindy Sterling returning as Frau Farbissina and Robert Wagner as number 2 in the present, but when Dr. Evil gets to the past, number 2 is played by Rob Lowe, and Farbissina is played by Mindy Sterling again. I just really like that her appearance hasn't changed at all. There's also a strange little subplot involving Farbissina in the present coming out as gay, but in the past we see her and Dr. Evil get it on, and at the end it's revealed that Farbissina is actually the mother of Scott Evil, played by a returning Seth Green. Much like in the first film, the stuff that I like is Dr. Evil, Farbissina, and number 2. They have a cool volcano lair now, which is a really crappy CG creation, but it's much grander, nonetheless, and more Ken Adamy than the lair in the previous film, and I feel like there are a lot less Bond villain-specific gags here, but there are some that are pretty good, and generally if any of those 3 characters are on screen, I'm having a good time. Even during the really bizarre mini music video that plays in the middle of the film for no good reason.
C'est la vie. Life is cruel, treats you unfairly. Even so, I God there must be Mini-Me, you complete me. Yeah.
Just me and you, just me and you.
Just the two of us. Building castles in the sky. Just the two of us.
You and I.
Will Ferrell also returns as Mustafa and basically does the same shtick that he did in the last one, but I like that shtick, so I was good with that scene.
I'm still alive, but I'm very badly injured. I think my legs might be broken, but I'll try to stand up. Ah! Yes, they are broken.
I also really like the cameo-laden sequence in which we go through a lot of euphemisms for,
Dick,
Yeah.
take a look out of starboard.
Oh my god, it looks like a huge...
Pecker!
Oh, where?
Wait, that's not a woodpecker. It looks like someone's...
Private!
And I was laughing quite a lot at that. There's some really funny and surprising moments in that sequence, and I also laughed a lot at Basil Exposition's disclaimer to the audience to not nitpick the time travel logic.
I suggest you don't worry about this sort of thing and just enjoy yourself. That goes for you all, too. Yes.
So that's all the stuff I feel good about the film, but I do have one big fat problem with it, and that big fat problem is Fat Bastard. Mike Myers' new comedy character for this installment is a grossly overweight Scotsman named Fat Bastard, hired by Dr. Evil to steal Austin's mojo, and there is really nothing to this character that is even remotely clever or witty. He's a big, loud, sleazy, disgusting slob, and all the jokes he provides come from how he's big, loud, sleazy, and disgusting, and it's the lowest common denominator of comedy for me. I mentioned in the last Austin Powers review that I don't think I'm a prude when it comes to this kind of gag, but it has to be earned. It has to be clever. Otherwise, you can, laugh at a 3-year-old for farting. There's no skill to this kind of gross-out comedy, so the laugh is completely unearned. Fat Bastard scenes really just feel like Myers put on the suit and stood there and just ad-libbed for hours, and they picked the takes that they wanted to use. There's something about those shots that feel really awkward to me, almost like they're at like a makeup test or something that everyone thought was really funny, so they stuck it in the final film. The absolute worst bit of the film is when, okay, so there's a stool sample from Fat Bastard that is being analysed in a lab, and it is mistaken by Austin for a pot of coffee, and he drinks it, and there's nothing more to that joke. It's just Austin drinks some poo, and we're supposed to find that hilarious. It's just so weak, and don't get me wrong, like, I don't want my comedy to be highbrow, philosophical level, highfalutin, stuff all the time. But if all that it takes to make an audience laugh is to show a man mistakenly drinking a bowel movement, I don't want to be a part of that audience. Similarly with Mini-Me, sometimes the joke is just... isn't it funny that he's little? And that just feels very unearned and bottom of the barrel kind of stuff. There's a strange thing where Fat Bastard wants to eat Mini-Me, and that was the only time that Fat Bastard ever made me laugh, and I'm not proud of it, but it's just so weird and strange, and I find it kind of hilarious.
Come here, I'm gonna eat you! I'm bigger than you, I'm higher in the food chain! Get in my belly!
The film works as a narrative much better than the previous film, which felt like a series of skits strung together by a wafer-thin plot. Here, there feels like a proper structure is in place, and I especially like how the climax takes place on Dr. Evil's moon base, and it involves a little time travel to save the day, and you know what, my memory of watching this series from a few years ago was that it was a series of diminishing returns, with each one more derivative and less funny than the previous, though watching this by Who Shagged Me this time, I figured it was about on par with the first film. There are some good gags and the narrative is stronger. There are more off-putting jokes and characters than the first one for me, and I felt like there was a lot less Bond-specific humor, but I guess that kind of balanced out. If you like the first one, I see no reason why you'll dislike this one. And yet, despite all that, I'm actually kind of excited to someday get to the third film, Goldmember, again. I know there's a lot of cameos in it, I know there's a lot of rehashed jokes, I know that it's not terribly fondly remembered like the other two are, but nonetheless, I'm still kind of looking forward to rounding out the trilogy at some point in the future. So that's it for this time, Bond fans. If you would like to take part in my next Patreon poll, then please do head over to my Patreon page to find details on there about how to vote and all that kind of stuff. And please do, as always, leave me a comment below with your thoughts about this movie. I'm really interested to hear about what some fans of it have to say. And until next time, so long for now, Bond fans.